Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Behind the Little Black Book of Strategic Planning, Ask the Author. I'm Lindsay Konzak, editor of Modern Distribution Management Newsletter and the website, mdm.com. I have the pleasure of moderating today's event. Our guest today is Brent Grover of Evergreen Consulting. As many of you know, Brent is the author of the Little Black Book of Strategic Planning for Distributors, published by MDM. Welcome, Brent.
Hi there, Lindsay, and everybody else.
Brent will be answering the questions about his latest book on strategic planning and how you can implement the principles outlined in the book. Brent Grover, as many of you know, is managing partner of Evergreen Consulting. He serves as an advisor to the distribution channel on strategic planning, mergers and acquisitions, strategic pricing, and profit improvement. He is a popular speaker at distribution industry events. Brent sold his own paper and packaging distribution company in 1999, and he's a long-time contributor to MDM. So I'd like to just start with our first question, which was submitted before the event. In Chapter 9 of the book, you talk about different alternatives for the design of distribution firms. In that chapter, you note that companies are becoming more dependent on information systems and other technology to run their businesses. With that in mind, this participant wants to know what some of the factors are that a distributor should consider before deciding to upgrade existing technology or change ERP systems as part of implementing their strategic plan.
Timely question, Lindsay, and something we've been working on lately in connection with a white paper we're writing is about the challenge of upgrading software systems, ERP systems at wholesale distributors. And in gathering information for that white paper, we conducted a survey, actually under the direction and through the auspices of MDM, thank you, where we found that, as we had suspected, a pretty significant number of distributors are multiple versions behind the current version of their software system. We delved a little bit deeper into why that is, but that's beyond the scope of the question, which is about what factors to consider before upgrading. And one idea that jumps to mind is not limiting your choices to an upgrade of whatever software you have today, but rather when a distributor finds the company multiple versions behind the current version, and there are many good reasons to be at or close to the current version and many reasons not to be multiple versions behind the current. But when considering that upgrade, not automatically upgrading to a newer version or the newest version of whatever system you have, but instead looking around the industry at all the different systems that are out there and considering switching to a completely different system, which may actually be on the same hardware platform that's currently in use, but it could be a totally different software product that better meets the needs of the distribution company in question now and in the future. Sometimes one might think it's safer or easier to stay with this current vendor and just jump to the current version. And oftentimes we found, and some recently through some painful experiences on the part of companies we work with, that staying with the same company and going up to the new version is very challenging. And people are always interested in looking at what's new in information systems. We could probably talk about that and totally as a subject in a separate webcast. But I guess the one thing that I would like to emphasize is before upgrading with the system you have, consider options which would include going to a different system.
Excellent. Thank you, Brent. Another question that came in before the event deals with strategic alliances between different distribution channels servicing corporate accounts. I suppose we could tie this into your Chapter 10 of your book in terms of how to determine your sweet spot and where you invest your time and money to grow your business. You discuss customer segments and how you can reach them in that chapter. So what are your thoughts on this question regarding the future of strategic alliances to reach corporate accounts or other customer groups?
I'm a longtime fan of and believer in organizations that enable independent distributors to get together, but for multiple reasons, not just for selling national accounts. I think a very good reason for independent distributors to form strategic alliances is to buy better, of course, to leverage their purchasing power. That's obvious. But in addition to that, there's a tremendous amount of networking opportunities when distributors who have a great deal in common, including being in the same basic trade line, but in different geographic markets, are able to share ideas, to help one another, to act as an informal board of directors or advisory board to one another. And that gets to your question, which is a third reason independent distributors get together in strategic alliances is to sell national accounts. Our experience with that is that it's often reactive in nature, meaning one of the distributor members in the association who has a national account and presently is servicing that account and may be very happy to have all the business, finds that the national account is considering going to another supplier. Perhaps it's a national company that is promising to do a better job servicing on a uniform basis throughout the country. There might be other reasons. Maybe it's just a question of the supplier the customer of the distributor, the national account, wants to consolidate purchasing and reduce the number of vendors on their vendor list, which is also often heard. So these reactive programs to try and salvage an account that might otherwise be lost, to me that's not usually a good outcome. It can be, but the hard economics of this is the reality of a combination of small orders and low profit margins, which can be very unprofitable for the servicing distributors. Oftentimes, some of the distributors in the strategic alliances who happen to have large locations of the customer in the market that they serve have a nice account, even if the margins aren't particularly good. At least the order size is desirable. But customer profitability analysis, which, as you know, I'm a big believer in that, and measuring cost to serve, that shows that many times these national accounts are good for the vendors. They're good for the manufacturers of the products to get the product out into the marketplace, into the national account. But they're not particularly good accounts for the distributors if they have to incur a lot of freight costs, or they have to incur sales costs, or they have to ship, and here's the fine ointment, ship products over a long distance in order to service a national account. So I do think they're generally reactive. Most of the organizations that I'm aware of personally in the strategic alliance world aren't particularly pleased with their national account programs, and their motivation is more to please the suppliers than to please the distributors by latching onto those accounts, Lindsay.
Thank you, Brent. In Chapter 7, you talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. In that, you discuss the role of leverage in a distribution business, which I'm sure all distributors are very familiar with. You say that bank financing often has a price and comes with strings attached. I guess given all that the economy has been through and the tightening of credit in many sectors, what are some of the best options, or what should distributors consider right now when it comes to financing? How has that changed the playing field for distributors, the recent economic crisis that we've all been through?
That's a very, very timely question for lots of distributors who are finally seeing daylight after going through a very dark and difficult period where distributors used lots of bank financing, typically working capital financing, which is a demand loan, which is collateralized by typically receivables and inventory. Those demand loans were often or almost always subject to collateralization requirements from the banks, which has to do with having enough receivables and inventory available to adequately collateralize the loan, make the bank feel secure, but also loan covenants, which are requirements that the distributor continuously demonstrate to the bank that it's generating enough free cash flow to cover the interest payments on the debt and with some cushion. So this was all really exacerbated when the banks themselves went through the difficult period precipitated by the Lehman Brothers disaster and the debacle that followed. So it's been a great time to use leverage because bank interest is cheap comparatively. By historical standards, it's very cheap. On the other hand, if it's not available, Warren Buffett said that cash is like oxygen. You don't think about it much until you need it, and then it's the only thing you can think about. So businesses and distribution running out of cash was a surreal event, and it happened to lots of distributors during the darkest periods of the Great Recession that hopefully is mostly over. Now, one of the great things about wholesale distribution is that we get leverage from our suppliers, and the best form of financing one can get is from a supplier. Of course, the payments have to be made on time, and particularly if there's a cash discount involved, which I view as a trade discount. It's just part of being competitive. However, bank financing comes at a cost. There's an interest expense, which suppliers don't charge for vendor financing. There are loan covenants, which vendors don't have typically. And there's also the question of collateral and other strings attached to bank loans that even though interest rates are low, they're subject to rise. And when you're at a historic low, there's really no place to go but up. So I really love supplier financing, and I'm a firm believer in negotiating very hard to get the best payment terms you can get from a vendor. I'm also equally fervent about meeting those terms scrupulously as agreed. So the leverage question, it's really getting back to the distribution profit model. We have low return on sales in wholesale distribution in most companies. In many lines of trade, a 2 or 3% return on sales before tax is thought of as being pretty good. And even though that's very low, on the other hand, it's offset by two wonderful things. We really can turn our assets over very rapidly. Many distributors, that's 4 times asset turnover per year. And we have a balance sheet leverage, which is a combination of supplier debt, which comes at little or no cost, and bank debt, which presently is inexpensive. So you could have a company with a 3% pre-tax return on sales that if they turn their assets over 4 times a year and their asset to equity ratio is 2 to 1, which is very conservative, that's a multiplier of 8, if you will, times the 3% return on sales, which therefore equals a 24% pre-tax return on sales, which is a pretty good place to be. We like to encourage companies in wholesale distribution to strive for and accept nothing less than a 20% pre-tax return on sales. 24% is a nice result. Leverage has a lot to do with that, Lindsay.
This next question is a little less quantitative, a little more qualitative. Throughout the book, you offer tips to make sure a strategic planning session or strategic planning effort is more effective. When thinking about going through this process, do people need to go off-site for a session to be effective? Or, what are your tips on the best location to kick off a strategic planning effort?
Well, sometimes people have in their minds the fact that a strategic planning session is best held in a cabin at the top of a mountain somewhere. And, it sounds romantic. Unfortunately, you waste a lot of time getting there. These days, with our telephones being ever present, and our text messages and voicemails and phone calls don't stop coming through, and just about every place you go has a broadband connection. So you know what? If the people bring their laptops and their phones with them, and they're going to get hooked up to the world electronically, they're not going to accomplish the purpose of getting away from the day-to-day activities such as the weekly staff meeting at the company, most of which is devoted to things that happened that morning or the preceding afternoon. The idea of a strategic planning session is to get away from all that and think about a year from now and think about 3 years from now. And I would rather have the meeting in the company's conference room if everybody would turn the phone off and shut the computer off and just focus on the meeting. It's very stressful. It's difficult work. It requires 100% concentration. The conference room at the company could be a problem if people are going to barge in, but I don't think it's necessary to go off-site. I think if you can do it, you can go to an inexpensive place that's convenient and nearby and achieve the same results. Change of venue can be very stimulating. It's nice to look out the window and look at the trees, but I think the main nuisance is controlling the interruptions from those things that go beep.
We know that can be challenging. Brent, we just had a question come in back kind of to the discussion. We were talking about technology and the factors distributors need to consider. This participant wants to know if you hear momentum to business software for ERP or CRM off-premise to cloud solutions, or what are you hearing on that front in terms of the desire to use cloud solutions versus on-premise?
Well, that's very timely. I think there's a lot of confusion about what cloud means compared to other expressions like hosted and software as a service or SaaS, and people are using these terms interchangeably, although I'm not a technical expert. I know there are technical differences. SaaS refers to a multi-tenant sort of arrangement where people are using the same system and they're sharing it. Cloud and hosted are similar, as I understand it, because each computer is running a version of the software that's personalized for their own particular needs. So I noticed that in May, Epicor announced that it made a deal with Microsoft to host its solutions, its ERP solutions at Microsoft, meaning on Microsoft's worldwide network of data centers. Amazon offers that type of service, so does Google. I don't know who the others might be, but people in the business tell me that the arrangements are being made, I think probably by virtually every mainstream vendor, to host their system in the cloud, which will enable the distributor to not have to have all the computer equipment on site. They won't have to worry about the data storage and the backup and keeping the version current, and having the staff to manage all that, which is, it sounds good. I guess the offset to that is we have to be confident that we're going to have adequate bandwidth in our pipe into the sky and dependability to make that happen. And it seems to me that we're almost there, and there's going to be some issues with people getting over the fear of having their data stored somewhere else. But I will be very surprised if that cloud hosted situation for ERP systems for distributors, I'd be very surprised if that's not commonplace in 2 or 3 years, Lindsay.
Great. And Brent, I think we have time for one more question, kind of related to some of the comments you just made in terms of hosting data off-site and security and that element of data protection. You talk a lot about uncertainty and the impact that can have on strategic planning, and a lot of people may be afraid to embark on a strategic planning process, especially right now given the economy and the changes in the political environment. I mean, there's a lot of factors going on right now making people reluctant to commit to anything. We're also reminded of this related to natural disasters. Obviously, Hurricane Isaac had a profound impact on a lot of businesses in the South. So I just kind of wanted to kind of wrap things up by see if you can just talk a little bit about how distributors can integrate some planning for unplanned events or the uncertainty that we're seeing into the process. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a big question, and I'll try to divide it into pieces. From one vantage point, natural disasters, obviously economic ups and downs, even political situations can affect sales and can affect demand for products or availability of products. So when supply and demand are out of kilter, of course, it can affect margins very dramatically. And there are many distributors who benefited. It sounds sort of sinister, but Katrina, for example, I don't think we really understand the effects of Isaac yet, but Katrina was a windfall in some ways. That's a pun, isn't it? For some distributors who sell building materials, particularly in the Gulf Coast area. So there's that aspect, which is how it affects supply and demand for our products. Which we try to plan for in wholesale distribution. What we recommend at Evergreen Consulting is having a base case plan, a best case plan, and a worst case plan, and building our base case around what we think there's about a 60% likelihood of happening, and then our best case maybe a 20% chance, and our worst case a 20% chance, and looking at the potential of sales exceeding our expectations or being less than our expectations, sales and margin, which of course yields gross margin dollars. But those are the things that we can use for cash flow planning and for adjusting our expenses to the level that we need in order to make an acceptable level of return. So one part of the question is the effect of uncertainty on sales and demand. Second way to look at that is from the vantage point of disaster planning, which is I see many distributors who have inadequate disaster plans. We went through a very painful episode with a distributor last year a multi-location company that had backup for their telecommunications system and their data processing system within their 8 locations. But unfortunately, when a power outage hit the main location for several days, and they had to go to the backup location to handle the data processing and telecommunications, the telecommunications backup did not work. So they ended up entering orders manually and faxing orders to enter them in a computer at a remote location. And you wouldn't think that that could happen in 2011, last year, or in 2012. So I feel, at a minimum, there has to be an ironclad, if at all possible, backup for the telecommunications system and for the data processing system, which means backup power and alternate paths for the telecommunications at the very minimum. So that's disaster planning from that vantage point. The third one, Lindsay, in terms of uncertainty, is economic uncertainty. Who could have anticipated the incredible recession that we went through, the sudden impact of I mentioned the Lehman Brothers situation in October of 2008. But beyond that, we are looking at this cliff coming up in Congress in Washington, D.C. this year, where the Bush tax cuts are set to expire, and the national debt ceiling and other decisions that Congress has postponed because they can't seem to get along with one another, they're going to have a 60-day lame duck session, as people describe it, to do some things that are going to making it very difficult for wholesale distributors, particularly those that are owner-managed companies that are privately capitalized, to do tax planning. Income tax planning and estate and gift tax planning right now are really in a state of flux. And there's another type of uncertainty that you may not have had in mind. But what we're advising our clients is that things usually regress to the mean. And if interest rates are at a 200-year low for a sustained period of time, they're going to go back to the mean. If income tax rates on capital gains at 15% are at an all-time low virtually since income taxes became what they are today, we should plan on them going back to 28% at some point, because that's going back to the mean. That the tax on income will probably go back closer to 39.6% than 34%. And the tax on dividends will not be 15%. It'll probably be at the ordinary income rate. That's kind of hoping for the best but planning for the worst. And I'm not sure that was the gist of your question anyway, Lindsay.
I actually think you covered everything I asked, so thank you, Brent. I know that was a big, broad question. So, well, we're out of time for questions today. I want to thank everyone for your participation and tuning in. And Brent, thank you so much for answering our questions. As always, we appreciate your insights. Again, if you have not yet purchased... Oh, sorry.
No, I just said thank you. I really appreciate the chance to do this.
Well, great. Thank you, Brent. And again, if you have not yet purchased Brent's book, he provides a lot more detail on a lot of these concepts, as well as actionable items you can use to implement the book's ideas in your company. You can order it at mdm.com/littleblackbook. And we now have an ebook version for your iPad. We also have a Kindle version that you can order through Amazon, so that's exciting. If you'd like to order multiple copies for your team, you can save on a purchase of more than 20 books through that link on your screen as well. Thank you again for joining us. This concludes our program.